Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel and welcome to the all-wheel drive conversation. Did you ever wonder how exactly does your all-wheel drive work in your Toyota or Lexus? Just to clarify, there are three types of all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, and let's kind of briefly talk about the difference before we dive in. There is four-wheel drive, which is referred to more like trucks, GX, LX, 4Runner, Sequoia Tundra, the truck, body and frame. And then there's all-wheel drive, more like Sienna all-wheel drive, RAV4 all-wheel drive, NX, RX, the cars, the normal stuff, unibody. In that type, there's two of them, which we're gonna dive into this video, start with the basics, then go all the way to the more advanced units. And then we'll take a quick tour underneath the car to see how these components come together right after this. Toyota all-wheel drive and similarly Lexus, they have some of the most simple all-wheel drive, really non-intrusive, really old on the old school side, and that's why generally they are pretty reliable. So this style that you see right here is actually the most common style of all-wheel drive you're going to see in many Toyotas. I mean, right from the mid to early 2000s all the way to today, believe it or not. It is not the type of all-wheel drive that is a Subaru symmetrical all-wheel drive. It's a very simple, it's basically meant to assist, not really do all the driving. If you want one that does all the driving, switch over to the body on frame trucks with the four-wheel drive and you will have that. This system, it looks initially so basic and has a lot of redundancies, but it is actually pretty clever, and it's the reason why it is reliable. Let's dive into the first type and we'll go out from there. So let's talk about the first type of all-wheel drive setups, which is actually the most common and the oldest one and the one that is very rugged, with a few exceptions, which we'll talk about, which is this one. So the first concept of all-wheel drive is the car is actually a front-wheel drive car. They took the front-wheel drive car, they thought about how do we send power to the rear wheels initially. That's the initial thought. So they added a transfer case. All the transfer case does is it makes the power that goes straight from the transmission to the wheels turn to the back. That's all the transfer case does. It has no electronics, nothing really fancy at all. It just takes that power that's going one direction, turns it this to go to the back of the car. It's always spinning, it's connected straight to the transmission, has a little bit of fluid to cool it, just by splash lubrication, and that's about it. Then you have a drive shaft that goes all the way to the back of the car, and then we arrive at the actual all-wheel drive part. First, the simple stuff. The rear wheels, they have two axles and then a differential that looks like this. This gets spun, the axles spin, and we drive. This is normally an open differential, so it's not limited slip differential, none of that fancy stuff. It's just an open differential. But where the magic really happens, because most people assume, well, that's all-wheel drive, we're connected. No, because the problem is when you make turns, your wheels will spin at different speeds, and if we are mechanically connected, we're just going to bind and stop. If you drive a 4Runner, for example, you're in 4 high, it'll bind when you make turns because everything is connected. You can't have different speeds. So that's not how this actually works. What actually does the all-wheel drive magic is this guy. This is called the viscous coupler, and that name is just a name. Let's talk about the construction here. This connects right here at the nose of the differential. So we're going to leave, the differential is pretty simple. We'll maybe make a video on how this particular one inside works and everything in later time. But here's how this is going to work. This is your viscous coupler. Right here is where your prop shaft that comes from the transfer case connects to, right here at the nose. This is fixed, and this part is the part that spins. Now you look at this little chunk of metal right here, and you assume, well, this looks pretty simple, but this is extremely heavy. I mean, this is almost heavier than the differential here. So how does this thing work and how do they distribute the power and all that? And this is where the real genius comes about. Inside of here, there is a lot of components inside. There is actually 2 clutches inside of this guy. There is a pivot arm and a little arm that engages the second clutch mechanically. Let's talk about how that exactly works. When we are in 2-wheel drive mode, this is spinning and the inside of this is spinning, but it's actually, nothing is connected. They're not connected. When you're driving, the wheels will turn this, and this is not connected to this. We're just going to freewheel. Nothing is happening. But when you want to apply all-wheel drive, like this, we'll talk about some of the modes of all-wheel drive here in a second. When you want to engage all-wheel drive, it actually starts with an electronic connection right here. This is a super strong magnet that gets energized. This magnet sits in the differential. This little plate sits first, and this sits right here. Once I get it to engage, this sits right here. This magnet, when it gets energized, it's actually going to pull a tiny little clutch, which is the primary clutch, the first clutch. When that clutch is pulled, it has a little pivot arm that's going to move and it's going to engage the big clutch. There is a giant multi-plate clutch here, sits right in the nose. That clutch is what's actually going to engage the outside, where our prop shaft is coming in, to this shaft. And now we are driving the rear differential. Very, very cool. Many people look at this component and they assume, well, what's inside of this? And the reason this is kind of unknown to most, this is not a serviceable unit. You cannot take this apart and replace the clutches. By design, this is not meant to be taken apart. This is a mega complicated little thing. Everything is very small and intricately designed in a way where they deemed it not a serviceable part. Now, here's where it goes to the next level with the modes of operation of the basic all-wheel drive. Let's talk about how this whole thing, or the modes of operation. If you're driving at anything over 25, 30 miles an hour, some models 40 miles an hour and up, this guy disengages, lets the clutches go, and we're going in front-wheel drive mode. Did you know that? That's how the system works. Because if you're taking a RAV4 all-wheel drive in very deep snow, driving at 60 miles an hour, and you expect this all-wheel drive system to just save you from situations, we need to have a talk. That's not what it's meant to do. It can engage at those speeds, but it's not going to be completely engaged all the time, because then you're going to sacrifice your efficiency, and they figured most people will not need that. They'll disconnect this and save you from the load on the transmission and drivetrain, so you can get better gas mileage. But here's how this actually works. This little magnet is electronically controlled. What the computer is going to do, it can supply power to it, and it's going to engage this 100%. Now you have full mechanical connection. But when you need to vary the torque to the front and back wheels, well, how does it do that if we have mechanical connection? It's going to actually pulse width modulate this little magnet. And let me switch back to English and translate what that means. Pulse width modulation. It's one of the coolest things that computers can do in cars. So instead of supplying direct power to this, where it's energized all the time, it's actually going to very rapidly turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, to a point where this is like almost running halfway. When this runs halfway, this sleeve that is here, that is going to pull that primary clutch and then make the pivot and engage the big clutch, it's also going to pull halfway. So you are basically purposefully slipping this clutch. So the clutch will not be fully engaged. It's slightly engaged where it's making some of this rotation, but it's not fully engaged where it has 100% direct power and that's how they're going to make it split. Depending on how much the computer needs to send power to the back, is it 50-50, 70-30, 60-40, however it needs to do it, it's going to control this, which will control the clutch, how much is it applied, and how much slippage is it allowing, and that's how it does that. Super clever. Because if you look here, there's not much going on here. There's a lot going on inside of this, but there's actually not as much as you would in a conventional four-wheel drive car. This is pretty cool. And the biggest thing about this is normally trouble-free. And we're going to talk about some things that destroy the system rapidly. The only known issue with this style of design is actually it was a common problem with the bearing that sits in the front of this area, which this is actually not it. 2006 to 2012, RAV4s did have this issue. They actually changed the design. You could, in some cases, change the bearing to the new design or change this whole coupler to the new design, and we're done. These systems do not have that many problems that you think about, because even though this sounds very complicated, it's actually very simple. There is nothing really, all you're doing is just energizing a magnet that engages a couple clutches, and if you worry about the word slipping a clutch, this is actually clutches are super heavy duty, and there's not been a lot of issues. And once the computer gets to a point where, well, we don't need all-wheel drive, shut this guy off, we're back to front-wheel drive. And then when you get to a point where you need, like the rear wheels are slipping, not the front wheels, it's actually immediately going to shut this off, send all the power to the front to get you out of that situation, and vice versa. Front wheels start spinning, slipping, it'll actually max apply this to get you out of the situation. And it's all computer controlled. The computer will watch various inputs, like your vehicle speed, like your inclination. Are you going up? Are you going down? Are you tilted? What's going on? It'll do that using something called a yaw rate sensor. And then it's going to know, are you accelerating or decelerating, with something called a deceleration sensor that knows, are you taking off or are you slowing down? And then the other sensors that it's going to use is a wheel speed sensor. It's vital to this operation because it's going to know which wheel is slipping. So here's how a wheel slipping is going to look in the eyes of the computer. I'm watching all my 4 tires. All of them are spinning at 10 miles an hour, but there's one tire that's spinning at 20. That means this tire is slipping and spinning faster than the rest. So I need to kind of send power away from this. Well, in this case, it doesn't have control over each wheel. What it's going to do is it's going to disengage the rear, because one of the rears are slipping. We're going to disengage the rear, shut this off, and we're going to send all the power to the front to get us out. If the front is the one that is slipping, we're going to fully engage this to send maximum power possible to the back and get us out of that kind of situation where we're slipping. See how cool this is? And here's where the newer cars, and this is a newer mode that they're doing. Let's say one of your rear wheels is spinning. Well, instead of disengaging this completely and letting go of the rear wheels, now the front wheels possibly will spin. Here's where the modern ABS comes in. ABS can pulse each wheel as needed. So if my right rear wheel is slipping, but my left rear wheel is good, well, they're gonna, through the ABS system, all these computers are always talking on the network. Hey, Mr. ABS, can you apply a little bit of brake, create some drag on that wheel that is spinning, that is slipping? It's gonna apply the brake a little bit on this wheel, and because this is an open differential, it's immediately gonna switch all the power to the other side, and now you get yourself out of that little situation where you're stuck or that wheel is slipping. You see how cool this is? This is all computer controlled. There's not much that have changed with this particular design. They just changed the software. The computers are talking to each other. They're making all these decisions. They have this giant meeting that is going on while you're just going about in your day, in a snowy day. Pretty cool, right? You might have heard the term torque vectoring. So torque vectoring is a principle, but here's how Toyota took that and kind of applied it to some select models. I can imagine that the engineers sat down and they figured, how do we make our current all-wheel drive system a little bit better, a little bit more, give us a little bit more control? Because with this system, while it's rugged and reliable, you do have limitations because you don't have a lot of control. You can't cut things. You're using the brake here and there, but it's not as, you don't have full control over each individual wheel, full apply or full disengage. So here's what they did. They took a good look at this system, and they figured out how to make it even better by adding 2 more of these. So here's what they did. They put one of these at the transfer case in the front, and they put one of these on each rear wheel. So now you have a total of 3 of these clutches and the whole 9 yards. The front one in the transfer case is slightly different because it has to disconnect basically the transfer case and connect it. But the rear ones are very similar to this. So here's what that torque vectoring system gives you the ability to do. In the non-torque vectoring system, the prop shaft is always spinning. It's always mechanically connected. It's always sending power to the back. But when that power comes here, it's connected to nothing. It just spins. But in the torque vectoring, they're able to disconnect the transfer case. So now there is absolutely no power loss going to the back when they need it. And then when they do need it, they can actually isolate one side of the wheels completely and apply full power to one side of the wheels. Yes, it is mimicking what the brakes were doing, but this does it a lot better. So it adds a lot more components. It's not just, oh, let's just add these and we're done. No, it adds a lot more component, makes the differential a massive unit, because imagine you have one of these here and here. It makes it just a giant unit. But that's how torque vectoring works. It basically gives it more control. Can we shut off this wheel completely and leave all the power going to one? Or can we vary? Now we have a bigger split. We're not letting the open differential do the split. We're controlling the split. You can apply 70% of the rear power to this wheel, 30 to this, and immediately within a second the computer can flip it. That gives it a lot more dynamic when you're going a little bit heavier off-road situation. Not exactly like a truck going, like a 4Runner going up the mountain, not like that, but it gives it more control. But the biggest benefit to torque vectoring is you have 0 loss. If you're driving on the street, you don't really need all-wheel drive. We don't need to be spinning that transfer case and that whole prop shaft, just wasting this whole power. You can actually disconnect everything, and now we're just free-flowing, which is pretty cool. And that's really, in my opinion, the main reason they did that is to improve your gas mileage by disconnecting all these systems. And then when you need them in a situation, they actually work much better than this system because there's simply more control. Let's talk about some things you should never do to your all-wheel drive system, which brings us to the exact conversation of why do I have this differential and why do I have this particular unit that we're using for this nice video? Well, these two come from a 2016 Toyota RAV4. This one, if you notice it, I'll show you a little close-up, is burned up. The clutches are completely burned up. The bearings are completely burned up. This differential is completely destroyed. And the reason for that is you should never tow your car with wheels on the ground. What's going to happen when you tow your car with wheels on the ground is you're going to supply power, spinning power, backwards. And that overheats these clutches, and once this overheats, it's going to transfer the heat here, it's going to cook the fluid, and eventually you're going to have so much heat here, this will start glowing to a point where it just completely disintegrates everything. You notice this is blue because this was glowing at some point. I mean, absolutely glowing red. So this unit is actually destroyed. All the clutches are gone. And the typical thing that happens from so much heat that builds up here, it burns up the bearing, it dries it up from all the grease. In the differential side, it actually overheats where now none of the contact points are correct, everything is out, and this starts whining. And eventually, I've seen cases where this gets so hot, it just completely rips out of the differential. Never tow your all-wheel drive car with any wheels on the ground of this system. Wheels off the ground, 100%. Unless you want to find out how much these two cost, which I'll just put that number right here. Especially this. This is extremely expensive, folks, and this is not a serviceable part. Now, this differential, could it have been rebuilt? Yes, this was an insurance job. They didn't want to go through it. This could have been rebuilt, but usually the cost to do it right outweighs how much this costs. But this guy cannot be rebuilt by design, because this is very complicated inside and they did not want to deal with this. It's a unit, you buy it, it's very expensive. Never tow your all-wheel drive Toyota or Lexus with wheels on the ground. Always flatbed, we're done. We don't have any issues at that point. Now that we've talked about this system, we are underneath a RAV4 here. Let's show you guys how this system is actually put together in a car so you can visualize it. So first, let's start with the basics. This is your powertrain. This is your engine, this is oil pan, and this is your transmission. Starts from here, this is your transmission. Now, power normally goes out of the engine into the transmission, and then differential is right here. This is a transaxle. The differential is right here. Power goes this way to the wheel through the axle. Another one goes to the axle. That's your front wheel drive car. But if you notice here, we have this transfer case, which the axle goes through, but halfway in the transfer case, it starts sending power back. And if we go around and look right here, this is your prop shaft that is connected to the transfer case right there. Then we're going to follow that. We're going to follow this prop shaft. Normally the prop shaft, because it's very long, they will have a center support, usually sometimes a bearing or a bushing, like this one is a bushing, and then we're going to follow it back to what we talked about. This is that viscous coupler, and then this is the differential, and then from the differential you have two axles that send the power to the wheels, and the connector that connects to that magnet that we showed you is actually all the way in the back. If you look right in this area right here, you'll see this wire right here. That's where this actually connects to it. Pretty cool setup, doesn't look super complicated, and now you kind of visualize how this is all put together in the car. Folks, that is your all-wheel drive. It's a pretty clever setup, and a setup that is very rugged, very reliable. It's not the most capable. You're not going to go, on the dunes or just driving over rocks and whatnot and expect to go through, but this really helps in snowy conditions, kind of light off-road where you have better traction. It'll get you out of some situations when you're stuck, but it's not really meant for overlanding, serious, like off-roading. But you can drive off the road in some gravel roads and have some good control. And this system, very reliable, as long as you don't tow it with wheels on the ground. And the last one that I will add here as an added bonus, try not to put different size tires side to side, because this actually destroys the system as well. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.